Hi, welcome back to Movie Review Mom. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me. And if you're new here, be sure and subscribe, like the video, ring that little bell, all of that kind of stuff. Now, today, the movie I'm reviewing is called The Last Shift. It's rated R. It's an hour and 30 minutes. And I'm going to tell you the grade that I'm giving it at the end of the video because I want you to hear all of my reasonings for why I give it the grade that I do. So this is kind of an interesting movie. First, I'm going to give you a nutshell overview. Then I'll give you some tips for parents because it's a rated R movie. And then point out some things I liked and didn't like. So first, in a nutshell, this movie is in theaters right now. Although I wouldn't recommend you race out, risk COVID to see this particular one. It's probably going to be on streaming soon enough. So there are some people that are braving the theaters and they didn't really know that much about the movie. There hasn't been a whole lot of advertising. And of course, if you're not watching movies in theaters, you're not seeing all the trailers. And so a lot of people didn't know quite what to expect. So that's the point of my movie review, is to give you a little bit of an idea of what to expect in this movie. Now, first of all, the movie is not to be confused with another movie called Last Shift, which is a super creepy, gory, gross horror movie. This is called The Last Shift, and it features excellent performances. The film was written and directed by Andrew Kahn and will make you think about your own life choices. It's an interesting peek at two fast food employees who have opposite attitudes, work ethic, and even life experiences, and yet end up in the same place. The Last Shift is also being called a comedy, but it's really more of a sad drama with a few moments of humor, I would say. It's a very slow burn, and it does include some very intriguing themes that are worth talking about. Unfortunately, the director doesn't really go deep enough into that conversation, and so most audiences are walking away kind of bored, disappointed, and hungry. Now, let me give you some tips for parents. The movie is rated R and includes some profanity, including F-bombs, although other swear words are replaced with less offensive words like frickin' and stuff like that. There's also some crude language and conversations that'll make you go, ah, and yet those are also some of the funnier moments of the movie. A man flips the bird at some people, another man gets mugged, and generally kids are going to be really bored, and so will some adults. Now, the themes that I found to be really interesting include working for a living and your life's work, taking pride in your work, teamwork, attitude, about work, of course, but also life in general, valuing yourself and others, the price of crime and education, racism, integrity, and the influence that we have on each other and on each other's choices. And so there's a message about being careful about who you choose to spend your time with. And of course, in work situations, we don't have a choice on who we spend our time with. So I thought that that was another interesting element. Now, there were some things that I definitely liked about the movie. And first of all, number one is Richard Jenkins. He's absolutely fantastic in this role and gives a stellar performance. His facial expressions and body movements just kept me mesmerized, really, in every scene that he was in. I liked his sound effects and just the little nuances that he gave to this particular character that made you want to know a little bit more about this character. Was there a learning disability? How did he grow up that gave him such low self-esteem? And you learn a little bit about that, actually, but it unfolds very subtly in the movie. Another excellent performance was by Shane Paul McGee. Now, he actually began practicing his Academy Award winning acceptance speech when he was only 4 years old. When he was in high school, he attended the Beverly Hills High School Theater Arts Department, and since then graduated from a couple different colleges that he attended with fine arts degree. And when I looked on his filmography, I noticed that the majority of his work was pumped out really in just the last 2 years. So I think he is well on his way to a very successful acting career. He did a great job and a great counterpoint for the other lead character. Now, there were so many things that were not said in the movie, leaving unfinished conversations and unanswered questions hanging in the air. And so, if that was intentional, I thought it was really effective. However, if it wasn't a deliberate choice and more a result of poorly designed narrative, I actually thought it was still pretty effective. That being said, it leaves the audience a little bit frustrated, wanting more information, or just thinking, oh, nothing was there. And so I think more could have been done with these characters and these themes. Now, I always get a kick out of Ed O'Neill. He plays a side character, and his character is very colorful and is mostly the one who offers the humorous moments in the movie. And he also provides some context for Stanley's character. So you understand a little bit more about where he came from, how he grew up, and some of the mentality that he had, that they both had. So I thought that that was really good. Other cast members who also provided some good background and necessary background and who did a really good job were Allison Tolman, Burgundy Baker, and Divine Joy Randolph. They also provided the main characters opportunities to have conversations so you can learn more about their personalities and where they were in their life at the time. Now, both of the protagonists actually experience shifts in their character and their thinking. And I thought it was really fascinating to watch the events that caused those changes. So if you're watching the movie, don't expect big events and, big action or anything like that. These are very subtle conversations that affect each of the characters. And I thought that that was an interesting study. Now, there were some things that I didn't like. And first of all, it's a very slow burn, as I mentioned. And so a lot of viewers are just leaving the theater feeling dissatisfied, frustrated, saying nothing happens in the movie. And if you're expecting, a real laugh out loud comedy, you're definitely going to leave disappointed. If you're looking for a character study, this is more of a dramatic movie where you've got to look deeper for something of substance, I think. Some of the editing in the movie was choppy, and there was this one scene where the transition made it hard for me to know if the events that occurred in that scene occurred immediately after the previous scene or if some time had passed. And I don't know if I just looked away or what, but it took me a minute or so to realize the timeline of this particular scene, and it shouldn't have been that difficult. And so some of the scenes are a little bit like that, where you're not sure how much time has passed. So the very beginning of the movie gives you an idea of the timeline. So just take that into consideration. And as I mentioned, the movie is being advertised as a comedy, but the lines that I thought that were most memorable and the ones that I wrote down were actually the ones that provided some insight into the character or into life in general. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Stanley is the older gentleman, the older employee who has worked at this fast food joint for 38 years. And so his task is to train this new employee. And he says to the new employee, sometimes you got to do more than just the bare minimum. And I think that concept of what is the bare minimum is really interesting because, well, I don't want to give too much away. Just consider that concept as you watch the movie, and then also reflect on your own life and when you choose to do the bare minimum or when you're really giving it your all and yet your rewards are the bare minimum. I think that is an interesting conversation. Then another conversation, the younger employee who's being trained just is pointing out how Stanley has wasted his whole life at this job for just practically minimum wage. And he's like, you got to make a stand against the man. And Stanley says, I don't have the luxury of taking a stand against the man. And it's interesting because they're both fighting against the same man in that sense, but their approach is very different. Now the movie progresses and they actually develop a friendship, but some events unfold that challenge that friendship and the respect that they have for each other. And at one point, Stanley says, I always say the first half of Graveyard is fighting off drunks. The second half is fighting off boredom. So there are a couple of cute scenes where they do some things to kind of liven up their graveyard shift experience. And you feel like, okay, we're making some progress here. And then, as I said, some other things happen that kind of rewind the friendship and trust that they have with each other. Again, okay, maybe that was saying too much already. And then finally, another conversation is between the older employee and the younger employee. And the older one finds out that he was a writer in high school and says, oh, are you still writing? And the younger employee says, inspiration is hard to come by on an empty stomach, which is a really good point, which is why they're both working this job, for money. It's not anybody's dream job to work in a fast food restaurant necessarily. And so they're both trying to make the best of their situations. And anyway, some other things happen. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I do have other lines that I've written on my written review, which is located at moviereviewmom.com. So be sure and take a peek over there and participate in the contests that I have and see some of the other written reviews. And then finally, I wanted to share a recommendation for another movie that somehow popped into my head as I was watching this movie. It's called Sorry We Missed You. And it's another slow burn kind of a movie where life's experiences present interesting obstacles to overcome and the mindset that it takes to overcome them. This movie just reminded me of that movie, even though they really are different. Anyway, I'll show my movie review after this one so you can consider it as an option. All right, the grade that I'm giving this movie is a C+. There were some missing things in the movie, and yet I feel like there was some opportunity to discuss some really interesting ideas and talk about how they were handled in the movie. Anyway, the performances, as I mentioned, were great, and I look forward to seeing more performances by these two main actors. Okay, and the good news is that there is still plenty of good stuff to see on streaming. You don't have to even leave your house to see some really great movies that are out there. So check them out on my Movie Review Mom YouTube channel, see what some of your options are, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.